Welcome to episode 362 of FBI Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Kathy Adams, who served in the FBI for nearly 29 years. On this episode, she reviews the rescue of a restaurant owner who was kidnapped for ransom at gunpoint from his Champaign, Illinois Mexican restaurant and held for 5 days in September 2006. Using cell site analysis during the multi-state investigation, Kathy, along with FBI agents assigned to Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, as well as FBI headquarters, and investigators from the Champaign Police Department, were able to identify, track, and arrest the kidnappers. The victim was rescued from a motel room in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and most of the $250,000 ransom money was recovered. After graduating from the FBI Academy, Kathy Adams' first assignment was to the New Orleans field office. During her 11 years there, she became the first female FBI agent SWAT operator. Her team was deployed to Waco during the David Koresh standoff. Kathy also worked the landmark Shattered Shield case involving police corruption, the protection of drug dealers, and the murder of a witness. Kathy and the case agents were awarded the Extraordinary Service Award given by the Metropolitan Crime Commission of New Orleans. Kathy's next assignment was to the Springfield Division in Illinois, where she worked violent crime, focusing on the activities of the gangster Disciples. Kathy was able to disrupt and dismantle the gang during her Group 1 undercover operation, Jaguar, which resulted in the successful prosecution of over 40 individuals. Kathy was recognized with the Director's Award for outstanding contributions in law enforcement. Kathy continued serving on SWAT in the Springfield Division and became the first female FBI SWAT team leader, directing several successful missions. Later, Kathy became a crisis negotiator and was transferred to the Champaign Resident Agency, where she continued to investigate violent crime matters and public corruption. She was also the coordinator of the Eastern Illinois Safe Street Task Force and the Springfield Division's primary coordinator for the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. As an FBI crisis negotiator, Kathy was involved in training local and federal law enforcement officers. For her work efforts throughout her bureau career, Kathy received recognition and awards from numerous police and sheriff departments, as well as from every FBI director she served under. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team about crime fiction and the FBI and books, TV, and movies, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Kathy Adams. Hey, Kathy, how are you?
Good. Thank you, Jerry.
Well, I just read your bio to everyone so they know what a fabulous career that you had, mainly working violent crime and gang-type cases, and of course, your work that you did in the crisis and hostage negotiations. So there were so many cases that we could have had you talk about today. But the one that we chose was the kidnapping of a restaurant owner who claim to fame was that he served burritos as big as your head. I like that.
Yes.
And so this was a case that involved several field offices and that even headquarters had input in and was a week long. So it just sounded like the perfect case for you to review on FBI Case File Review. So my question to you is, where do you want to start?
Well, I think we have to start a little bit beforehand of the actual kidnapping in regards to actually talking about who they were going to kidnap. And this case was very interesting because we had several track phones, several cell phones, 4 subjects. We had language issues with a lot of Spanish speaking. But what we'll do is I'm going to introduce these subjects and I will refer to them as their last name. So prior to the kidnapping, there was communications between Arturo Castro Estrada, which I'll refer to as Estrada. Estrada was an over-road trucker, and Francisco Villalobos, a.k.a. Adrian Lopez, who I will refer to as Lopez. He was the main instigator and leader of what occurred. Lopez had a conversation with Estrada about a plan that he was working on in order to get some money. Adrian Lopez and Estrada discussed in vague terms who they were going to kidnap, where they were going to hold them, etc. There was also conversations between Terrence Merritt, another subject, and Lopez. This discussion was regarding obtaining firearms to be used in the kidnapping. Merritt was the one that secured the weapons from the gang members out of Decatur, Illinois, which is actually 45 minutes to the west of Champaign. The kidnapping victim was Antonio Aguas. He and his family, meaning brothers, owned several La Bamba locations in, I believe, 3 states, to include Illinois. The name of the restaurant was La Bamba's, and they were known for burritos as big as your head. They primarily focused locations in college towns. They happened to own one in Champaign, Illinois. In the afternoon of September 10th, Antonio Aguas was working at the location at La Bamba's in Champaign, Illinois, when this incident happened. It began with Antonio going out the back door of the business late afternoon, early evening. At that point, a maroon Mitsubishi pulled up. Lopez jumped out of the car, put a gun to Antonio, and told him to get in the car. They held him at gunpoint till they drove to a cornfield, which was approximately 2 miles from the La Bamba restaurant. There, Antonio tried to escape, and while he was trying to escape, the gun fired, and it went through the back seat into the windshield. When that happened, Antonio left the Montero Mitsubishi and ran through the cornfield. Unfortunately, Antonio was caught, and when he was caught, he was pistol whipped in the head several times. He was stripped down to his underwear. He was bound, gagged, and his eyes were duct taped shut. There was a cloth placed across his eyes also. Because of the fact that the Mitsubishi now had a damaged windshield, Lopez contacted another individual, Rafael Orlando Villalobos Beltran, who I'm just going to refer to as Orlando. Lopez called Orlando, who lived in a city approximately 45 minutes, an hour south of Champaign, and he directed Orlando to bring another vehicle because Lopez was afraid that with the broken front windshield, it would draw attention to them, and of course, Antonio being present in the car. So Beltran, after a while, he did come up. He drove a Ford Mustang, arrived at the cornfield, and Lopez and Orlando had a conversation. Lopez advised Orlando to drive the car back down to Mattoon, and he told him to bleach it, clean it up, and cover it so nobody would know. Orlando didn't want to take it to his home to do this, so he took it to a mechanic shop that he had friends working on. Once that happened, going back to the cornfield, Lopez placed Antonio in the trunk of the Mustang. From there, they drove south again, but southeast towards Indiana. And at 1 a.m., there's a video of Merritt going into the Walmart located in Paris, Illinois. Paris, Illinois bumps up to the border of Indiana. Merritt went into the Walmart and was seen purchasing prepaid phones, I think approximately 3, and he bought new clothes for Antonio. From there, They drove to a motel, the Forest Motel in Rockville, Indiana. They arrived there at approximately 4:10 a.m. on the 11th of September, which that was a Monday. Antonio continued to be gagged, blindfolded. They put earplugs in his ears, and they stayed at the hotel very briefly. But while at the hotel, well, I'm going to back up a little bit. Antonio was savvy enough to rub blood around the trunk of the car, thinking that his DNA would then be there and it would lead to, again, his rescue and the identification of subjects. So they drove to this hotel in Rockville, Indiana. Antonio's gagged, blindfolded, earplugs in his ears. And Tony again had the foresight to urinate in one of the beds, again doing that with the purpose of his DNA being in that hotel. On 9/11, Ramiro Aguas, who is Antonio's brother and co-owner of the La Bamba's restaurant, received a phone call while he was in Mexico. This was about approximately 3:30 p.m. He was told that Antonio had been kidnapped, that Ramiro was instructed to get to Champaign as soon as possible and not to notify anybody, or he'd never see his brother Antonio again. Ramiro contacted the Champaign Police Department, who then contacted us. This was approximately 5 p.m. on that Monday. And I'm going to refer to the Champaign Police Department as a CPD because they played a critical role along with partnering with us to bring this good resolution.
At the time, where were you? Were you assigned to Champaign? I take it that's a resident agency, an RA out of Springfield?
Yes, it is. And I was assigned there. And that particular Monday, which was September 11th, I had gone to a dermatologist at lunch. They found something on my neck and had to take a big biopsy off it. I had this big bandage around my neck. And duty agent got the call concerning it and said that it wasn't their responsibility. So I received the call.
It wasn't their responsibility. I don't understand.
They said that they weren't going to respond to handle this situation because they weren't assigned, or it wasn't a responsibility within the context of agents being terrorism agents or public corruption agents, etc.
So they were looking for you because this was the type of case that you worked, this violent crime.
Correct. Yes. So I got the call at 5 p.m. And then from there, I immediately called another agent, Pete Buckley, who played a tremendous role through this whole story. And I'll refer to him as Pete. He was acting supervisor on that Monday. And I had called him at lunch. I said, Pete, I got this big bandage on my neck. Do you mind if I just work from home the rest of the day? And he said, that's okay. So when I got the call regarding this potential kidnapping, I didn't even hesitate to respond to the Champaign Police Department along with Pete Buckley, again, having this big bandage around my neck. So 5 p.m. Monday afternoon, we are briefed on what the Champaign Police Department had started, which included trying to identify family members, etc. They also received a call from one of their family members that the vehicle that Antonio drove was still in the back of La Bamba's and it had the keys in it. So they immediately suspected foul play. During that first day, Lopez advised Antonio to call his wife and tell him that he was going to be gone for a while to visit relatives, which Antonio did. So we're at Champaign Police Department. They are dedicating resources to the situation. Pete and I get there probably around 5:30. And we discussed what was going on with the ransom demand to Ramiro, who was located in Mexico.
And that was the brother.
Correct.
Let me ask a quick question, because people are going to be wondering why the Champaign Police Department called the FBI. So can you talk a little bit about that, and also whether or not you knew those police officers who called you beforehand.
Yes, I knew them, and Champaign Police Department was the law enforcement agency that handled crimes within the city of Champaign, Illinois. I, as being involved with a lot of things, had worked with various detectives who were assigned to the Champaign Police Department, as well as the chief, deputy chiefs. Along with Pete. They knew Pete also. So they initially called the FBI because, one, it was international, and two, it was right from the get-go a kidnapping. And Champaign had the foresight to say, well, we need something more here, and we need to call the FBI and get them involved in this case.
And when you said international, did you mean interstate or?
It was both international because Ramiro was located in Mexico. He was down there. The family owned a big ranch, and Ramiro and Antonio were thought to be very wealthy because of the ranch that they had in Mexico. The subjects knew of Ramiro and Antonio because they actually had done surveillance before they ended up kidnapping Antonio. Ramiro was the original subject that they wanted to kidnap, but with the timing, they took Antonio. Being one international, the first call to Ramiro with a demand for money to see his brother again, which in turn, we also had an interstate nexus between Illinois and Indiana. So that's essentially what began our role in this whole investigation. We were briefed that Ramiro received this call in Mexico. We also called Ramiro to speak with him, and we were able to tell Ramiro that he was going to try to get back to the United States, but he needed some time. He couldn't just jump on a flight due to the flights that were offered on that day. Or night, I should say. So we had planned for Orlando to arrive at O'Hare Airport, Chicago, Illinois, from Mexico. We, as myself, Pete, and two detectives with the CPD, drove to O'Hare Airport to be there for when Ramiro arrived. Fortunately, Pete had good liaison with the agent that covered O'Hare Airport, so he made contacts with this agent, explained the situation, and we were able to get Ramiro off the plane first and take him to a room located within the airport. Now, we were unsure whether this was a family kidnapping to get money, and we didn't know if we would have counter surveillance watching Ramiro get off the plane, and so we were very discreet about getting him off the plane and brought to a room. From there, we had an interview. We got his name, what his role was. He explained that he and Antonio were very close and that, again, he had received these phone calls. While we were at O'Hare Airport, Champaign dedicated resources again to locate family members to interview and put out a missing person alert paper, for lack of a better term. So also while we were at O'Hare, we obtained his authority to be able to record conversations that occurred over Ramiro's phone. And we did this because, one, we knew that there were phone calls and that there would be most likely subsequent phone calls. So we got his permission to record conversations and to put trap and trace on his phone. Now, trap and trace is where a call could be incoming or outgoing, and it would indicate the cell towers that the phone might be hitting off of, providing us with a general location of where Lopez would probably be. We did what we needed to do up in O'Hare. We arrived back to Champaign around 3 a.m., and we knew that we needed to keep Ramiro with us because, again, we didn't know what we had.
At this point, did the kidnappers know that he had returned to the U.S., or did they think he was still in Mexico?
I believe they knew. I say that because the next morning there was an early call, if I recall right. We got back to the Champaign Police Department at around 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m., and Pete was tasked with staying with Ramiro at a hotel. I went home to catch about 2 or 3 hours of sleep, went back to the Champaign Police Department. Pete had stayed with Ramiro early that morning, went back to the Champaign Police Department. At this point, Antonio's wife is concerned about Antonio, and she was trying to tell Champaign PD, what are you doing? You're not doing enough. And unfortunately, we weren't able to share what we were doing throughout this investigation with the family because we didn't want to compromise Antonio's safety. Now, that in of itself was difficult to do naturally. And we were also able to keep the media, the press, unaware of what was going on, which was a very, very big help to us.
You had mentioned that the kidnappers asked Antonio to call his wife and say that he was going out of town. So obviously, either she didn't believe him or she heard from his brother that he had actually been kidnapped.
No, her alarm went up when they found Antonio's car behind Labama's with the keys in it.
All right. So when he called to say he was going to be out of town for a while, she didn't believe that at all because she knew the car is sitting out here with the keys in it. So she knew that that was a lie that somebody obviously was making him say.
Right. Okay, so at September 11th, we have Ramiro at Champaign Police Department along with Pete and myself and all the resources that Champaign Police Department could offer. I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about another subject that played a role in this, and that subject was Arturo Castro Estrada, and I'll refer to him as Estrada throughout this interview for simplicity. I'm going to provide details that at the time we were unaware of, but we learned of these once we had arrested Estrada, and Estrada began cooperating with us, and he provided a timeline of his involvement with Lopez and the link between those two and Lopez and Estrada and the kidnapping. On the 10th, which was the day before the kidnapping, Lopez discussed in vague terms his plan in order to get money. Estrada was an over-the-road trucker, and he had communications and close contact with Lopez throughout these next 5 days. Estrada was told that Lopez was in big trouble because he kidnapped this guy. He didn't say Antonio's name, but he referred to the one at La Bamba's. So again, Ramiro was the original target, but they settled on Antonio. September 11th, he was kidnapped on the 10th. On the 11th, which was Monday, 1 a.m., Terrence Merritt, who was also a subject, Merritt was captured on video, obtaining a couple of track phones, prepaid phones, and some clothes for Antonio. From that hotel, they did go to another hotel very, very briefly. They have them checking in at 4 a.m. And actually, Lopez did sign his name. So we were able to confirm and locate at the second hotel that Antonio was brought to. Also on September 11th, Champaign Police Department set up a command post in order to keep track of what was going on and provide resources where needed. So on the 11th, we continued to investigate what we needed to investigate, and we notified the Springfield Division of the FBI, of which the Champaign office is a resident agency. Once they were alerted as to the situation, we called it the FIG, the Field Intelligence Group, which I will refer to as the FIG, began to dedicate intelligence analysts a program called Rapid Start to keep track of the leads, and Illinois State Police became involved with their ability to have a statewide terrorism Illinois center and help out with what we needed. Okay, so we're still on the 11th, the Monday night. I failed to say that at 11 p.m. that Monday night, Ramiro got a call and there was an initial demand of $250,000.
Now, was that the total demand or just a down payment?
That was supposed to be part of the ransom. The ransom demands ranged from $1 million to $5 million to ultimate conversation, and it was reduced to $250,000. Champaign PD had a big rapport with a lot of the businesses, and they were able to actually secure $250,000 in cash. So we secured the money. As you can imagine, $250,000 is a large amount of money, and it took up like a duffel bag to hold it. That Monday, we were trying to get a tracker in the money, thinking that if we did make a money drop for the safe securing of Antonio, we would be able to track where that money went. Unfortunately, the tracker that was sent was about the size of a brick, although it was designed to be covert. Pete was talking to the head of the office in Springfield, Illinois, the special agent in charge, and telling him that no, we needed a better tracking device because that was too big. The kidnapper would know. While also this was going on, the Indianapolis field office was notified as to what was going on, in as much as the subjects transported Antonio to Indiana had held him in Indiana from Monday until Friday when Antonio was rescued. Okay, so we have analysts coming to Champaign. Command post has been set up. Pete and I are in contacts and our case agents for working for the safe securement of Antonio. Okay, let's go to the next day, which was Tuesday on the 12th of September. At that time, phone calls were being monitored not only through the consensual recordings, but also through the trap and trace. And our field intelligence group began to do what they do best, and they started tracking the phones. So they were able to start tracking calls at approximately 2:20 a.m. on that Tuesday, which would have been the 12th. And those calls were actually hitting off an Indianapolis cell tower, and we were able to locate that cell tower, so we had a general idea that they were in Indiana.
I need to make a remark about the established relationship that the FBI obviously has with the telephone service providers in order to make this happen so quickly. I mean, there must have been an emergency warrant that authorized this almost immediate access to the kidnappers and to Ramiro's phone.
Yes, we had a phenomenal tech agent. We actually had two tech agents that had rapport with all the cell carriers. And once we had gotten Ramiro's permission to record conversations on his phone, we were able to not only record the conversations, but we were also able to utilize the intelligence that came from the trap and trace, which was incoming, outgoing call, what time the call was, the cell towers that the phone was hitting off of to give us a general idea of where Antonio was being held. On that 11th, also the Monday, we again were not really sure what we had. So we polygraphed Ramiro, and of course he passed, and he stayed at the Champaign Police Department and was primarily the right-hand man to Pete Buckley. That happened on the Tuesday, and beginning on that Tuesday at approximately 2:20 a.m., we have a call that hits off the Hickory Hills Tower in Indiana. We, meaning our tech agents, were able to determine that they were the phones that Merritt had bought at the Walmart that day. A track phone is a track phone you can put minutes on, but you can run out of minutes, which means you lose your phone contact. I'm going to back up again and introduce the subject, Estrada. Estrada was aware at the time that there had been a kidnapping, and Estrada, being an over-the-road trucker and being good friends with Lopez was trying to secure Estrada's truck. in order to transport Lopez. We have Lopez driving the Ford Mustang. Antonio's at a hotel in Indiana with Terrence Merritt. Estrada is told that Lopez kidnapped Antonio from La Bambas, and Lopez indicated that he had been talking to Ramiro and that he asked Estrada if he wanted to help out with this kidnapping plan. Estrada told him, no, I don't want to get involved. There's too much risk. And so they drove around together and they decided that they needed to find a home to keep Estrada in other than the hotels, because the second hotel, they were spooked, for lack of a better term, because they wanted to clean the room. And actually, they couldn't clean the room with Antonio being held. One of the other unique things to this investigation is that they did have a voice-altering device. And what this is a device that doesn't mask your voice, but it certainly changes it. And they used this with the understanding that then Ramiro wouldn't know that it was Lopez. I believe they knew each other vaguely from the restaurants that were located in Champaign and then restaurant located around Mattoon, Illinois. So Estrada's driving around trying to find a safe place to house Antonio. And Lopez at the time was driving the Mustang with Estrada inside the Mustang. They drove around to try to find a secure place, and they could not find a place. They got brochures for cabins. The cabins they went to were all booked. So Antonio remained in yet another hotel room, which this hotel, we subsequently found out that that hotel was located in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Lopez asked Estrada if he would help him get rid of the Mustang, and because it had traces of the kidnapping. Jumping ahead, once we did locate that Mustang, the Mustang had corn stalks in the back of the trunk along with visible blood. So during this time also, Lopez didn't want to drive the Mustang, so he asked to use Estrada's Cadillac. Also during this time, Lopez and Estrada went to several locations, of which there was calls being conducted between Lopez to Ramiro. During this time also, through Champaign Police Department, we were able to identify individuals that might be linked to Antonio and Ramiro in different Mexican restaurants, with the thought at one time that one of the owners of one of the Mexican restaurants was jealous or wanted to do what they did because of the La Bamba's restaurant. We were able to flush that out, and that wasn't the meaning behind the kidnapping. And I'm going to say we, because it's all encompassing. It's the Champaign Police Department, it's Illinois State Police, it's FBI, Springfield, Illinois, and now we have Indianapolis Division, Indianapolis, Indiana. The phone calls that were ongoing during that period of time was numerous, and part of the challenge in this investigation is that quite a bit of the conversation was in Spanish. So while all this was going on, we also notified our FBI headquarters located in Washington, D.C., in our critical incident response group, to let them know that we have a major case here. We also were able to contact the headquarters crisis negotiation unit because they're the experts in negotiating cases like this.
Were you also a field hostage negotiator?
At that time, I believe I was. I also was very familiar with headquarters because I was also the coordinator for the Safe Streets Task Force group that worked out of Champaign. So now we have Crisis Negotiation Unit in headquarters. They provided us with a Spanish speaker, and hour by hour, they were able to include, again, the critical incident group response. And they, in turn, were able to provide guidance as to analysis of the conversation that was going on. For example, the way it was conducted, what was said, was it a true threat? Was it not a true threat? So they were included while all of this was going on.
So in a way, they were kind of coaching you, giving you advice and coaching.
Correct. Yep. Yes. And it was, as I said, it was all hands on deck. On the 12th, we had intelligence that indicated one of the phones was hitting a tower in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At that time, we did have to notify the field office in Wisconsin. They were clued in as to what was going on. They were able to immediately brief agents who in turn went out to where that cell phone was located and identify Estrada and Ramiro. They were together. On the 13th, Estrada and Lopez are still driving around. Estrada is able to overhear some of the conversations that were going on. Of course, that they were one way. So Lopez and Estrada, they are at a location. Lopez went to sleep in the Cadillac that night to catch a little bit of sleep. Estrada slept in his truck, and then Lopez was still trying to convince Estrada to let him use the Cadillac. So we're on the 13th, and there were a lot of other things obviously going on the 12th, but we're on the 13th, and approximately 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, Ramiro received a call. It was Estrada and Ramiro were located at a BP gas station in Beloit, Wisconsin. And at that time, pressure was being put on Ramiro to come up with the ransom of $250,000. The conversation was partly in Spanish and English, and part of the English conversation was, "We don't have the money yet," and the subject saying, "Just get here." Between 2:00, 2:20, and 2:50, there were 3 more calls that were made by Lopez to Ramiro.
You got to catch us up now because they're asking Ramiro to come to Indiana, but he ends up going to Wisconsin.
Yes, and that's part of the traveling back and forth and the towers that are being hit and the calls that are going back and forth.
Well, let me ask you about Ramiro then, because what do you have set up for his safety? Because they already have his brother kidnapped, and now, even though he doesn't have the ransom money ready, they're asking to meet with him in person.
Right. When the site on Friday, which was the actual ransom drop, they were agents in surveillance. Ramiro had an agent with him at all times, sometimes 2 or 3 agents. We were very covert in that, didn't advertise what was going on. So Ramiro was able to be coached. We call it a third-party intermediary in negotiation terms. And what that is the role that Ramiro was playing. So we were guiding Ramiro on what to say and what to try to attempt to get proof of life. And Ramiro was then in turn, of course, very emotional, very get it done now, get it done now. We were able to convince Ramiro that we had to do things a certain way in order to secure Antonio, because at that time we do not know where Antonio is. Estrada and Lopez are driving around. They go to a truck stop in Wisconsin because that is where Estrada parked his semi, his load. Estrada then gets into another vehicle that he owns, a Cadillac. So the loads drop there. We do have the cell towers again, and the phone. So we were able to identify where that phone was. And that was in Beloit, Wisconsin. Wisconsin agents are then notified and they respond immediately. They noticed that Lopez actually had gone in to the store there and purchased some cleaning equipment. So he wiped down the telephone in order to erase any fingerprints that he may have put on the phone. He also wore gloves, and he tried to mask his identity by wearing a hoodie over his head the whole time.
All right, so Romero is trying to find the money, but the kidnappers say to him, even though you don't have the money, we want to meet with you first. Where was the first place they asked Romero to meet them?
The actual meet place, it varied. And the reason why the Wisconsin started playing into it is because Lopez was with Estrada, and Estrada, being an over-the-road trucker, went to provide these locations that weren't necessarily directed by the kidnappers themselves, but they were places that Lopez happened to be with Estrada. So we'll kind of dissect it a little bit. So Lopez and Estrada are together. They're driving around first to find perhaps a cabin to keep Antonio. And Estrada, in turn, is dropping off his truck. Eventually, he got another load. But Estrada's car was located in Beloit, Wisconsin. The analysts were able to locate that phone. Surveillance was put on that phone. Lopez is seen on the phone making demands. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, again, the 13th, which was Wednesday, Lopez then advised Ramiro to go to Bloomington, Illinois and wait further instructions. So we have Ramiro then on a phone being used in Bloomington. To make this even more complicated, there was a cell phone and there was prepaid phones being used. Ramiro starts driving to Bloomington. He is at that time in Estrada's Cadillac. Calls are being made to Ramiro regarding the securing of the ransom in order to release Ramiro. So on the early morning hours of that Wednesday, Lopez was sleeping in his Cadillac. Estrada was sleeping in his tractor. Lopez asked if he could use the Cadillac. From there, he stopped at a petrol truck stop. Estrada got a load, and he noticed that Lopez kept following him. So he stopped, asked him why he was following him, and again, because Lopez wanted to use the Cadillac. One of the overhears that Estrada heard Lopez saying over the phone was, "Do you want to see your brother alive? Do as I say, and everything will be okay." Now, mind you, during this time, there are conversations or calls being made to Ramiro, and we, case agents, are hearing this talk about a truck. There was a conversation between Estrada and Lopez where Lopez wanted to do the money drop at a rest stop above the tiles in the restroom, and that was a no-go. And that's how we're learning these details regarding the relationship between Estrada and Lopez. Eventually, Lopez ends up driving the Cadillac. Estrada gets another load, so Estrada and Lopez part ways. Another location that we learned that Estrada and Lopez went to was a location still around the Beloit, Wisconsin, Northern Illinois location. And another statement that Estrada was overheard was, "Listen, I'm going to tell you one more time, I'm the one calling the shots." And he didn't overhear anything else. The field intelligence group is monitoring where these phones are and what was being said also. Eventually, Estrada parts ways with Lopez. Lopez is driving the Cadillac. Estrada essentially is out of the picture. We'll continue on. Between approximately 2 o'clock p.m. on the 13th, 11:45 p.m., there were numerous calls between Lopez and Ramiro. Afternoon of the 13th, we're recognizing that this is a major case involving several divisions, and the head of the Springfield office wanted us to move the command post to the Springfield office, inasmuch as there were quite a bit more that could be offered through the field office, the Springfield field office. And fortunately, because we had such a good relationship with the Champaign Police Department, that wasn't a real big deal. And we included Champaign Police Department officers and detectives and a lieutenant to, if they wanted to, be a part of our command post in Springfield. Some of the conversations that were overheard between Ramiro and Lopez was the statement, "We don't have the money yet," and this back statement over here, "Just get here." And that's when Ramiro's being directed to go to Bloomington, Illinois.
At this point, has he any contact with Antonio? Does he know that Antonio is alive? Has he had any proof of life?
There has not been, not at this point. We have the command post set up, and Ramiro's being directed to go to different locations. Some of the language or the conversation we were able to, in a very timely manner, hear by virtue of English being spoken, what some of the demands were and what Ramiro was directed to do. It's the night of Wednesday, 9/13. We moved the command post over to the Springfield Division. We have all resources at our fingertips. We've included now the Wisconsin Office division. We've included the Indianapolis division. We also included the St. Louis division, and I believe they supplied us with the use of a plane to get aerial surveillance where we could. So now we've got 3 states involved in this kidnapping. We have Antonio being kidnapped behind his business. We have the kidnappers going to the Walmart to get track phones, more clothes for Antonio. Antonio's stuffed in the Mustang. He's transported to a hotel in Indianapolis. Antonio's bound, gagged, blindfolded. He spreads blood in the trunk of the Mustang, and they're at the hotel.
How far is it from Champaign, Illinois to Springfield, Illinois? Because that's where the command post was moved.
Correct. That is about an hour and 15 minutes with a tailwind. And it's directly west of Champaign, Illinois. And that being the field office, I was the case agent that was assigned, or was the one that was handling the command post, directing the investigation from the command post, and coordinating all the resources and the divisions that we have involved. Pete was attached to Ramiro during this, along with a supervisor that supervised our squad, also the assistant special agent in charge. He also was involved with providing assistance in handling Ramiro. And I'm unsure of who was in the car at what time, but Ramiro was always accompanied by an agent. We got to starting at the night of the 13th at approximately 8 o'clock. There's a call from called the Hy-Vee, which is like a truck store location in Peru, Illinois. And Ramiro is told that $250,000 is only the tip of the iceberg, and, quote, the big guys want more. So Lopez was talking as if he was being directed by somebody higher up than him. And we tried to flush that out, and we weren't able to determine that there was anybody higher than Lopez. It was Lopez who put the plan into motion, and it was Lopez, along with Merritt, transporting Antonio and involved with him during the course of the investigation. Now, let's include a little bit of information about Merritt, because he's kind of on the sideline right now. Merritt was associated with Lopez through criminal activity, and Merritt was tasked with getting weapons, and he secured 2 of the weapons. He stayed with Antonio while Lopez was traveling around as being directed by the kidnappers. And during this time also, there were communications that Lopez told Merritt that if he didn't hear from him more than a 2-hour time frame, he was to kill Antonio. And conversations did include how to kill him, and that included at the final hotel laying out plastic bags, and in order to keep the hotel room from a lot of blood. And Merritt had a weapon, and Antonio was ultimately be able to tell us that Merritt would play with the revolver and he could hear the cylinder being turned. They also had a baseball bat, a metal baseball bat. Lopez again directed Merritt, if he didn't hear from Lopez within a certain amount of time, that Merritt was to hit Antonio with the baseball bat, but not in the head, hit him in the knees, and hit him in the back. So we've got a baseball bat there. Merritt's ready to kill Antonio if Lopez directs him to. 8 o'clock, we got a call from the Hy-Vee in Peru, Illinois, and Ramiro is telling the kidnappers, Lopez, that he wants to talk to his brother. Again, this is proof of life. And this was instrumental in helping us determine that, yes, Antonio was still safe. Proof of life is just part of the process when you're negotiating with a subject who is involved with the kidnapping victim. So a couple minutes after that call, around 8 o'clock, Antonio calls Ramiro. Antonio tells Ramiro that he's got a gun to his head and that Ramiro is supposed to do what the kidnappers say. So again, proof of life, but again, knowing the seriousness of the situation, that there was weapons, there was guns involved, and the conversations between Merritt and Lopez, although strained, they were ready to kill Antonio if they didn't get what they wanted. So still on the 13th, there were calls that negotiations about the money. At that time, it went from, $1 million. It's going to be $5 million. They were trying to set up a location for the money drop. Now, back at Champaign headquarters, yes, there was $250,000 in cash. It was raised through the businesses that Antonio and Ramiro were associated with in Champaign, and they were willing to step up and put this money available for the payment to get Antonio safe.
With the understanding, I assume, that hopefully the kidnappers would be caught and that money returned.
Exactly. And for the Bureau, that's rather unusual. Obviously, that it is something that we didn't provide the money. The fact that the business owners thought so highly of Antonio and Ramiro, they were able to come up with $250,000 at short notice. And one of the things, too, normally, if we were doing any time investigation where money is being paid to a kidnapper or to a drug dealer, we always try to Xerox the money. So if we do buy drugs or we do pay the ransom demand, then we can match up serial numbers to help prove the case. Now, both Pete and I, when we were and I was in Champaign Police Headquarters, we looked at the bag of money and we looked at each other and we thought we're not going to be able to copy every single bill. So the money was, fortunately, some of the money had serial numbers that were in order. So we could take Xerox one, and that included like 20 bills, just for an example. Okay, $250,000. Ramiro's driving around. Phone calls and negotiations are being conducted. Ramiro's got an agent with them. 3 states are now involved in this investigation. And Ramiro is growing more and more agitated in that he wants his brother and he wants his brother now. Fortunately, the rapport that was built in such a short amount of time from Monday to that Wednesday, that Ramiro listened to the guidance that the FBI provided. Also, even though we did not have a Spanish speaker with us at the time, Champaign Police Department did have an officer that spoke Spanish, so he was able to help us along the way to determine what was being said in Spanish. And we also had a Spanish-speaking negotiator from headquarters that was involved in the negotiations and in trying to direct them to secure Antonio and arrest the subjects. Here we have the night of the 13th, which is that Wednesday night, and another call right before midnight. Antonio calls Ramiro and tells him, give him the money tonight, so the release will be tomorrow. So we got proof of life still. It's Wednesday night. Lopez is no longer with Estrada. Merritt is in a hotel room that at the time we didn't know, a hotel room with Antonio in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Preparations had been made to kill Antonio, and several calls go back and forth. When I say several calls, I'm talking probably throughout this whole ordeal, probably over 100 calls back and forth.
Wow.
Yes, and they were at all hours. We'll go from September 14th now, and that's Thursday. There was another call at 12:23 a.m., and calls continued until about noon that day. And there was approximately 30 calls just made within that time frame.
So during these calls, Lopez is telling Ramiro where he wanted him to go. But even though he keeps directing him places, they still haven't met up yet.
Right. Merritt has no contacts with Ramiro. Merritt is, to our knowledge, only communicating with Lopez and only being directed by Lopez. And essentially, Merritt's to babysit Antonio until the money is dropped, and then they'll release Antonio, hopefully. Early morning on the 14th, which is a Thursday, talking about 12:30 a.m., approximately 2 o'clock, there were about 30 calls, during which time at 3 a.m., Lopez directs Ramiro to come to Chicago. And Ramiro, he fakes like a heart attack. And I'm in the command post in Springfield. We have the communications over speaker, so we can hear, or I can hear, I believe I had headphones, so I could hear what's being said, at least in English. Part of it was that we needed to buy time. And so Ramiro faked like he had a heart attack. He's on the phone with Lopez saying, I'm tired, I'm worn out. I think I'm having a heart attack. I have to pull over. I think I'm having a heart attack.
And that was something, I take it, that all of the negotiators decided they needed him to do to buy time. He didn't think of that on his own.
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. What's interesting about that, as soon as the call ended, I hear Ramiro say, that was pretty good, wasn't it? Over the speakers in Springfield, which kind of lessened the intensity of the situation a little bit. Afternoon of September 14th, the Thursday, Ramiro has a conversation with Lopez, tells him he has the money. Lopez tells him he needs to go to Indianapolis, and that's where the money's going to be. And during this time, Lopez is providing Ramiro with directions and telling him what interstate that he's on, what state road he needs to take, how to get to where Lopez wants him. Afternoon of the September 14th, there's details as to where to drop the money. Again, Ramiro has conversations with Lopez saying, we'll give you the money, I'm going to get my brother back. And then Lopez tries to tell him that he needs more money and tells Ramiro that he now has $1 million ransom to get his brother released. And Ramiro tells Lopez, no, I cannot get $1 million. I had $250,000, and that's all he's going to be able to get. So Lopez, in one of the phone calls during this period of time, tells Ramiro if he doesn't get to Indianapolis by 10 or 11 p.m. that night, Antonio would be killed. Later that evening, about a half an hour, Antonio calls Ramiro and tells Ramiro that he's being treated well and that Ramiro needs to come to Indy. Well, Antonio's in the hotel room with Merritt. They had a lot of time together and they develop a relationship together. And it's such a congenial relationship that Merritt cuts the zip ties from Antonio's bindings and also takes the cloth with duct tape out of his mouth, and he removes the blindfold. They also are able to, at one point in time, Lopez actually delivered Subway subs to them because they were hungry. Although it was intense and treading lightly with what was being done, Antonio was comfortable with Merritt at the time, even though the cloth was down, the guns were there, the bat was there. So Antonio calls Ramiro at 7:34 p.m. and tells him that he's treating him well. Later, he calls Ramiro and tells Ramiro that he's going to be cut into pieces if Ramiro doesn't get to Indianapolis. And then Lopez talks to Ramiro and tells him that he will blow Antonio's head off if he doesn't do what he's being told. So again, you can tell just by the nature of the language that it's ratcheting up quickly. And although there is more of a plan to where the money was going to be dropped to secure the release of Antonio. Early morning, about 12:30 on the 15th, calls between Lopez and Ramiro between 12:30 a.m. and 6 o'clock a.m. During this time, too, while I'm in the command post, I don't sleep. They get a hotel room for me, but I didn't. It was too fluid, the investigation, and I needed to be directing things.
And it doesn't seem like Lopez is sleeping either or allowing Ramiro to get any sleep.
No, we subsequently learned that Lopez was taking a lot of drugs to keep him awake. And about the only time during this period of time that we know he slept was when he slept in the Cadillac, Estrada's Cadillac, for a couple hours on 2 occasions. So yes, just by sleep deprivation, it causes a different thought pattern. At this time, time, okay, I'm in the command post. I haven't slept. I really haven't eaten. And the support personnel were telling me, okay, you got to eat. You got to eat. So I said, okay, bring me a vegetable wrap from a local Subway shop. And so they brought one, and I'm at a table and I'm unwrapping it. And I look down and all it is lettuce with vegetables. And I said, I thought there was going to be bread. Where's the bread? So,
Are you serious?
yeah. Yeah. So, but I ate it.
What you have is a salad.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness. All right, we're going into the 15th. More telephone calls. Calls are being traced to a cell tower located near Portland, Indiana. The motel room is tentatively identified. The Merritt is still with Antonio. Merritt's getting very agitated because he hasn't heard anything from Lopez.
And they've been in that room now for 2 or 3 days, right?
Yes, yes. So we're on the 15th. We're able to tell that there are calls made. There's calls that are telling him, directing him where to drop the money. One of the directions was early morning on the 15th. And Ramiro actually thanks Lopez for allowing him to speak with his brother. And Ramiro is directed to go back to a BP station, again located near Portland, Indiana, and go to a dead-end street and drop the money. Ramiro again argues about the drop, where the money's to be dropped. And mind you, we're directing Ramiro where we would like to have the money dropped, in as much as the safety not only for the public, the safety for the agents, the safety for Ramiro, and the safety of Lopez. So we're able to provide Ramiro with some instructions for where we would like the money to be dropped. And this is about 6 o'clock on the 15th. Ramiro says, I'm not dropping the money if I can't talk to my brother. At one point in time, we identify a location that we would like the money to be dropped. Antonio tells us later on that the location, there was a bridge and he was to be zip tied to the bridge. And if Ramiro didn't cooperate, his fingers were going to be cut off. It was such a serious threat that Merritt actually brought some cloth so the blood wouldn't get everywhere. So we've got agents providing surveillance in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We've identified where Antonio is being held. We're directing Ramiro. Ramiro does have the money. And sometime during this couple of days, Ramiro becomes in possession of the $250,000. So the plans are made for where the drop is going to be. Antonio says, it needs to be here. They might cut off my fingers. One more time, Ramiro gets proof of life from Antonio. And at approximately 8:30 that morning, Ramiro was directed to drop the money near the stream and he would pick it up. The money was dropped. Ramiro, mind you, is under surveillance. Ramiro goes and picks up the money. During this period of time, while all the communications are going on, the law enforcement identifies the vehicle that Lopez was driving and were able to flatten the tires of this vehicle.
And that's still Estrada's Cadillac?
Yes. So agents covertly cause the tires to go flat. Lopez goes out to get into the Cadillac to go pick up the money. He sees that the tires are flat, so he calls a tow truck business. Tow truck comes out. The car is being towed. Lopez advising the tow truck operator that they need to make a stop before they go to where the car was going to be towed. Lopez jumps into the cab of the tow truck. At that time, we did determine that Antonio was being held at the hotel in Fort Wayne. So the discussions about Antonio being zip tied to the bridge, those were not true. Ramirez provided a location to drop the money by Lopez. Lopez is in a tow truck with his car on the back of the tow truck, tells the tow truck operator to make a stop, which was a stop to pick up the ransom money. And mind you, all of this is under surveillance. Lopez picks up the bag, gets back into the tow truck, advises the tow truck to stop, I believe it was at a Dollar General, because Lopez wanted to buy a new bag in order to switch the money into the new bag, which he did. And he's seated outside on a bench. I think think it was where his car was towed. But needless to say, he is arrested with the money, except for the money that he took out of the $250,000 to buy a bag. So I don't know how much that cost, but we recovered all the money, maybe less, $50. And Lopez was arrested. Simultaneously, the agents that were able to identify where Antonio was being held was a room 15 at a hotel in Fort Wayne. They safely make entrance into the room. Merritt looks out and he sees a little something, so he gets kind of spooked. So Aguas is zip tied and gagged and blindfolded. He undoes the zip ties, takes the cloth out, removes the blindfold, puts him under the mattress. He puts the gun under the mattress, and agents securely enter the room, and Antonio is safe and secure, and Merritt is arrested. There was a lot of other working parts in this that occurred simultaneously. On the night of the 13th, I believe, going into the 14th, we have what we call an emergency Title III. An emergency Title III means that there is a life that is imminent of being killed, and that because of that, we need to get an emergency authorization to listen to phone calls. Title III affidavit was written, and in order to get approval for the Title III, the Attorney General for the United States, along with the FBI director, have to sign off on it.
And this isn't something that could be done by a local judge?
No, because of the nature of the emergency Title III. And mind you, emergency Title III allows us to listen to any call that comes into Ramiro's phone.
Right, because I need to understand what the difference is between these calls and the calls that you have already been listening to.
These calls include, say, Lopez is talking to Ramiro and hangs up, and there's another call to, actually, I think it was on Lopez's phone, that allows us to listen to all the calls as opposed to just the calls between Lopez and Ramiro.
The initial calls that you were able to listen to were just the calls that were being received by Ramiro. What this does is allow you to listen to all the calls that are coming in and out of everyone that's been calling Ramiro.
Yes. And it is a very rare situation that an emergency Title III is not only asked for, but approved. And early that evening, I had a conversation with one of the deputy directors and I believe the Attorney General regarding the facts of the case, the facts that were articulated within the four corners of the Title III affidavit. And I was so worried because I hadn't slept and I had all these details and I wanted to make sure I didn't say anything that was not factual because of the nature could compromise the affidavit. The Attorney General of the United States signed off. Director Mueller signed off on it. So we were granted the emergency Title III. Along with all this that was going on in the command post, the Bureau oftentimes needs to reboot computers or reset computers and all. And the head of the Springfield Division knew that at midnight, I believe on the 13th, the computers were going to be shut down. So the SSC was in touch with the tech people back at headquarters saying, no, we need all our computers up. We need this Title III up. We need the resources that we have ongoing. Ultimately, it was learned that that wasn't going to happen, that our computer system and everything would be okay and operating without a time lapse. So that is a lot of material and a lot of moving parts, challenges in it, dealing with 4 subjects. And it was difficult because the names of the subjects varied. For instance, Francisco Villalobos was also known as Adrian Lopez. Orlando Villalobos, the one that picked up the Mitsubishi to be driven back to Mattoon, his name, aka Rafael Orlando Villalobos Beltran. And so it was part of the process was to identify that those names all were from one person. Also, the challenges were, again, the language, that most of the calls, the bulk of the conversations were in Spanish. The morning of the 15th, when everything happened. The money got dropped. Lopez was arrested. Antonio was rescued from the hotel room. Merritt was arrested. I remember listening over the speakers, and I hear that Antonio was secured. And I was just beside myself. I was so adrenaline going from no sleep and such a important, difficult case that I ultimately had to be driven back to Champaign, Illinois, because I just couldn't drive. I was spent.
You crashed.
But I was so elated and happy and just overwhelmed with the fact that nobody got hurt. I was referred to by other agents as the trifecta. We got the subject, we got the money, and we got the victim.
A trifecta success.
Right. There were so many other details that it's very hard to explain all the moving parts that were going on all at once. That is a case of what the FBI can do and their resources, and mobilizing so quickly various divisions, FBI headquarters, the various local police departments. And mind you, all this occurred within the scope of 4 days, really, from when Ramiro received the call in Mexico to Antonio's rescue. During the initial kidnapping of Antonio, he was asked if he had a chip in him. And it's common that wealthy individuals in Mexico often chip themselves because of the kidnappings that occur. With the chip, they could identify and locate where that person was. Antonio was not chipped, but they did ask him if he was.
The kidnappers asked, or the FBI?
The kidnappers asked him.
So how did this end? Did the kidnappers go to trial, or did they all agree to plea?
They all pled guilty. Lopez received 31 years. Merritt received 30 years. Estrada received 2 years. And Orlando Villalobos received 2 years. And they all pled guilty.
Now, as a case agent, those type of sentences, are always going to make you feel good. But I would imagine that the most important feeling is the opportunity to meet and speak to your victim. Did that happen?
Yes, there was a victim statement that was provided to the court. And Antonio, he kind of laughed about after he was rescued, in saying that the trunk that he was stuffed into, the Mustang, was bigger than the trunk that he came across the border in.
That was probably funny back then. There's probably
Yes.
people who would not laugh at that right now. But
Exactly. But he did say that.
I think it's funny.
Oh, I do too. He suffers still from physical problems because of being stuffed in the trunk and what occurred. At one time, Dalgo's family was so grateful for us securing Antonio's safety that they invited us to go to La Bamba's for a gathering. And of course, we paid for our dinners. But the thing I'll always remember is Antonio's daughter, who was probably 10 at the time, came up to me and said, "Thank you for saving my daddy." And that tells it all, right? Thank you for saving my daddy.
I know that you received commendations for the work that you did, but that had to be the best award that you received, is that little girl's acknowledgement.
Right. We were going to be submitted for the Director's Award, and unfortunately, Pete had an OPR going. And if you have an OPR, you can't get, the Director's Award. And I wasn't going to get it by myself because it was a team effort. I did not want to essentially take the recognition for all the work that everybody did. We did get an award through FIOLA, Federal Enforcement. It's an organization.
Yeah, Federal Law Enforcement Officers Organization.
Right. We did get that award for Antonio and Ramiro. We've kept in touch to this day. And Antonio, he calls the day that he was rescued, it's another birthday for him. So he calls September 15th as another birthday.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for reviewing this case for us today. I mean, it's just fascinating to see all the moving parts and how well the FBI works with law enforcement partners and putting together such an important emergency, life-threatening case like this together.
Yes. And I apologize if I leave anybody out as far as agencies, but man, it was just a hand in glove investigation. And as another follow-up, Pete and I were able to go out to that, I'll call it a corn crib, and we followed the path that Antonio took. And we knew this because there was blood still on the corn stalks. And we located where he was pistol whipped and taken back into the Mustang. And we located his clothes inside the corn crib. I believe along with his wallet was there. We ultimately were able to locate the Mitsubishi that he was in the initial kidnapping car. We were able to locate the Mustang. We were able to get search warrants for both vehicles, and we were also to get search warrants for the Cadillac, which provided us with additional evidence that was identified or used during the course of the kidnapping.
No wonder the subjects all decided to plead guilty.
Yes.
You had the evidence to prove your case.
Yes.
Well, I know that this kidnapping case was one of many violent crime cases that you worked. So I'd like to go back in time in your career and ask you my standard question: when and why you joined the FBI?
Well, I tell you what, we need to go into the Wayback Machine because
Okay.
I wanted to become an agent since first grade.
Really?
Yes, there was a book in the library. It was a red book. It was rather larger than a regular like textbook or a reading book. And it had stories in it about Babyface Nelson and John Dillinger and other individuals like that. And I was just fascinated by it. I was fascinated on what was in the book regarding parts of the investigation. And I knew from first grade that's what I wanted to be. And as I went through my education, I got to a point that I was finishing up my master's, but I wanted to get some street experience as being a police officer. We were assigned a book to read about what it was like to be a police officer, and it was only written by someone that rode along with a police officer for like 2 months. So I wanted to get the street experience with the work in the alleys, and I became a police officer with Baltimore City Police Department. There I worked violent crime. I was on their quick response team, which is like their SWAT team.
And when were you there?
82 to 86. I was on the tactical operations, which means it worked out of headquarters, and we worked high crime areas.
You wanted to get that hands-on experience before you applied for the FBI.
Yes, I just wanted to get the credibility. I wanted to get that street experience. And I thought it was important for being rounded as in a person in law enforcement because I had my education and I had my street experience. I applied for the bureau, and the first time I applied, I wasn't selected. And then about a year later, my buddy that I worked with, he went to DEA and he was saying, go to DEA. So I called the FBI office in Baltimore where I put my application in. They said, oh, you're Kathleen Adams? I said, yes. And they said, well, we have your approval right here. You're scheduled for such and such a class. And I was assigned New Orleans. I was fortunate enough to become the first female SWAT operator for the FBI, which I looked at it in a couple of different angles. One, being an agent, I wanted to be in the best shape, the most tactically trained agent that I could be, because I'm not a big person. No matter how big you are, there's always going to be somebody bigger than you that's going to harm you. And if I got myself in the best shape I could and got the training that I needed, I did my best. I was selected. I was so nervous because I was the first female, and it's a 2-week class at Quantico. So we get there, and first thing in the morning, we do a fit test, and I passed that without a problem. And you know how you have to put your gun in when you get to the academy at the armory? We went back to the classroom. The instructor said, well, this is a historical class. We have the first female here, real nervous then. So I go to the armory to get my gun, and they can't find it. I was like, what do you mean you can't find it? Oh, we can't find your gun. Here's one to shoot.
I should explain to everyone that when you go to Quantico, you're not allowed to carry your gun on your person while you're in the facility. So you had to check it into the gun vault. So you checked yours in, and when you went back to get it to use it for firearms, they couldn't find it.
They couldn't find it. And so, you had to be on the range. I mean, everything is just really stressful. I said, okay. So I took the gun that they gave me, and you had 2 times that to qualify with 90% or above on a difficult shooting course. And if you didn't pass within those 2 times, they sent you back to your field office.
And here you are shooting with a gun
Yes.
that you've never used before.
Right. I shoot it. I don't get above 90. I'm a 90 plus shoot her each time. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So another buddy that I knew in the SWAT class, he said, you want to use my gun? And I said, no, I'm going to use this one. So I had an instructor right over my shoulder, and I was up on the range because I think there was 3 or 4 of us that didn't pass. I'm going through the course, and I get to the end of the course. I see my target, turn my head around, and I said, I think I made it this time. So the instructor peeled off my target, brought it up to the bleachers where the rest of the class was, and scored it right in front of them. I was the only target that they did that to. And of course, it was a 90 plus. Then I went to the armory, and they had found my gun. I was so elated that I passed that I thought, why did they do that with my target? And then I thought, that was the best thing they could do. They showed that I earned that I did shoot above 90.
So there was no question as to did they give her a pass because she's a girl?
Exactly.
But I do wonder how many other guns did they misplace? Because that to me is something that I can't even understand how that could happen. All the different weapons that pass through the firearms section, how could they just happen to misplace your weapon?
Exactly. My initial thought was they didn't want a female and they were going to make it hard on me. And so they did. But I stepped up to the occasion, made it through the 2 weeks, and became an operator.
And became not only the first female SWAT operator, but the first female SWAT team leader in the country.
Yes. And how I became a team leader, I was on a team in New Orleans for about 8 years, and they dedicated the SWAT office to me down there. When I got to Springfield, I didn't want to jump into the SWAT program, but they needed operators, so I joined the team. And then sometime during my stay in Springfield, the second in charge of the division and assistant team leader came to me and asked me to be the team leader. I was like, wow, are you sure? And they said, yeah, you're the most capable, the most qualified, the most experienced. And so I stepped up again. While I was team leader, we protected the Pope, or the Pope detail down in St. Louis. And we had another major operation. And then I was in my garage, and I had all the weights on me that needed to be put on me to do my pull-ups. And we were getting ready to go back to the Academy for Training in Weapons of Mass Destruction. And I'm hanging in my garage with my weights on, and I say to myself, you know, Kathy, I didn't want to continue as a SWAT operator. I don't know how to say this, but I stepped down. And
Is it because you had already proved to yourself and to others that you could do it?
no, proof never really was a part of why I did things. You know, I didn't feel like I was given 110%. That bothered me because I'd always give as much as I can. When I stepped down, there was an opening for crisis negotiation, hostage negotiation. So I was selected and went back to Quantico and got trained up on that. I guess my claim to fame was, you'd be interested in this, Jerry. We were at the range. Pete and I in the squad were at a range for firearms training. And I never wore a tank top, but it was just so hot and humid that day. So we go straight through to shoot. We don't stop for lunch. And we're cleaning the gun. And I get a call from the supervisor saying there's a bank robbery gone bad. They want to talk to FBI. And so, long story short, I respond as an FBI negotiator. And because of my relationship with local law enforcement, I just waived going through all the outer perimeter and inner perimeter because they knew who I was. I began the negotiations. And what had happened was the day previous, there were 2 individuals that were stopped on the interstate in Illinois, and the officer took the registration and license and was doing what they needed to do, and there was a problem, so the officer approached the car and said, I think you know why I stopped you. At that moment, shots were fired. The car takes off. Tommy Martin, the chief deputy sheriff for Douglas County, was that officer, and he was shot. And you heard over the radio, I'm shot, I'm shot, I'm shot. And what happened was 2 individuals in the car then went to a house and did a house invasion, tied up the 2 occupants. And while they're there, a woman shows up to give the 2 parties Cardinals tickets. Well, they see this woman, and so they stuff her into a trunk and they steal another car. By that time, it's all law enforcement on the radio or hearing what's going on. So the car gets identified. The car is just flying down I-57, which is the main corridor. And as I'm driving to respond to where the command post, I just see cars flying past me. So I get there, and it turned out they took an exit and crashed the car, and one of them bailed out. The other one got arrested. Well, the one that bailed out went into a bank and took 5 hostages. And that's where I came into play. I was able to negotiate the release of all the hostages, and the subject, Tommy Martin, subsequently died from his injuries. But unbeknownst to anyone at the time, there had been a homicide up in Chicago the night before, and they staged the body. When I got the subject on the phone, I'm thinking, okay, how do I introduce myself? What, something relatable? They know that I'm FBI or whatever. And I thought, Silence of the Lambs, now that's too dated. How about Scully? I talked to one of the hostages and I say, I'm Kathy Adams, FBI. Tell him Scully. And so the subject gets on anyway. The night before, Thompson, who was the one in the bank, had murdered a man, Arnie Graves, and he staged a body, and he put red dragon tape on one shoulder and the other follow-up to Silence of the Lambs on the other shoulder. And I thought, oh my God, can you imagine if I would have said Silence of the Lambs?
Wow, it would have been like he was hearing some voice from a paranormal connection.
Yeah, the room that we were negotiating in, we didn't, it was at actually a farm equipment center. When it was all done, I was just shaking. I walked out of the room and I get this big hug, and I didn't know who it was. And it was one of the hostages. And he said, thank you for being so calm. Thank you. So he got life. I think both of them got life. Death penalty taken off the table. So that was interesting. A lot of nuances in that too.
Yeah, what a fascinating career you've had, Kathy. And I know that for the FBI's 50th anniversary of women agents back in 2022, you were featured on the FBI's website. So I want to make sure that I add a link to that in the show notes, along with some of the case-related photos that you provided about the kidnapping. Definitely want to make sure that people get a full idea of all the many things that you've worked during your FBI career. So I usually don't ask this question, but because you are such a badass agent, I want to make sure people understand that in addition to your agent work, you are also a mother.
Yes.
I want to make sure they see us as full people.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. My son was born December 9th, 1992. I had enough sick leave to take about 3 months off. And I went back to the division, and within a week, our SWAT team was deployed to Waco. It was supposed to be a 3-day deployment, but we were deployed from the day that incident happened. We were mobilized until the compound burned, maybe 29 children. I kept waiting for the children to come out, and the children didn't come out. And that whole time was such an emotional time for me, because you can imagine, I had a room by myself because I was the only female, so I didn't have anybody to bounce things off with. I balanced raising Michael. And in 1995, in April, my daughter was born. And while I'm in the hospital recovering from some complications, the Oklahoma bombing occurred. I had friends around the country. One of my friends in Dallas tracked me down, and I'm receiving a phone call in the hospital recovering about information as to where McVeigh might be. McVeigh Intelligence. To keep in shape, when Michael was a baby, I'd put him in like a rockaroo on my picnic table in the backyard, and I had a bike, and I would tie a shoelace around the end of the rockaroo to my leg and pedal, and that would cause the rockaroo to go back and forth, and Michael would fall asleep or he would be content. With my daughter, she'd get on my back. I'd do my push-ups. I'd do Jenny lifts. I tried to incorporate them. I'd run with them like races, and some of them I won, even pushing a baby jogger. Only time I slowed down was when he dropped the pacifier.
Well, I really appreciate, like I said, I usually don't ask those gender-based questions, but I do want to make sure that anybody listening that might be considering a position with the FBI or in law enforcement in general understands that
We
this
can
is
do it.
yeah, they could do it. They can do it.
Yep.
All right. So, my almost last question is, when did you retire and what did you do with all of the experience that you gained during the FBI? Did you get a post FBI position?
I did not. When I retired, I would have kept working, but Congress told us we had to retire at 57. And so I did. And I was a part of the Cold Case Foundation for a bit. And I worked for a company called Title IX Investigations, which was designed to investigate situations that are like sexual assault or sexual misconduct in universities. I worked that for about a year, I think year and a half, and it wasn't my bag of tricks. I've had numerous surgeries. I'm a member of the Surgery of the Year Club. I'm just active volunteering. I have been told year after year after year, Kathy, you should write a book.
That was going to be my next thing to say to you.
Here's my fear, Jerry. Unfortunately, when I was a cop, there was a woman that was very influential, very rich. She got connected to the Baltimore Police Department through their Signal 13 fund. And Signal 13, if you call it Signal 13, it's bad. And I've called one on myself. But because I was always involved in stuff, I mean, arrests and everything, the commissioner told me that she was going to ride with me to take photos. And I was opposed, but of course I was told. And I wrote quite a bit just from my police days. And she had taken pictures, and I didn't realize how meaningful those pictures are to me now, and that writing within that 4-year period. But Jerry, here's my hesitancy, I guess, is just navigating that whole process. I mean, it's hard to quantify so many high-profile cases I've been shot at, things that have occurred with my career. I don't know how to go about doing that. And I know you're an author, so maybe you can guide me.
I think I have some advice for you. You have some amazing stories. And one of the things I want to do is encourage you to write them down, because so many of us don't share our stories. I'm lucky to have this podcast where I can record some of those stories, because this is institutional knowledge that people can learn from. It also is a recording of your own legacy. And the most important thing is it is a way to show the public, to provide the public with a positive perception of the FBI. So after we are through with this recording, I'm going to work with you on writing this down and writing a book.
Okay.
So the very last thing that I would like from you is your last words. So what would you like to say?
I achieved my dream of becoming a special agent. I was gifted with the physical ability and mental ability to join the SWAT team. And I always thought that you could do whatever you wanted to, but you had to put your mind to it, and you can do it. Don't cut yourself short. The support that others in the FBI give, it is truly a family, and that I'm lucky I had a good guardian angel. And several, probably. I encourage anybody to join the Bureau. If you've got the aspirations, do it. Put your application in, do what you need to do to get yourself physically fit, and go after your dream.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find photos of retired agent Kathy Adams, as well as news articles about the kidnapping case and related images. There are also several articles about Kathy's amazing career as the FBI's first female SWAT operator and first FBI female SWAT team leader. There are also links to more FBI case file review episodes featuring kidnapping investigations. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.